This is going to be a video on a phenomenon I have been bothered by lately. It started as an instinctual feeling of something potentially going wrong, and I hope that by the end of this I've been able to visualize and explain it in such a way that you can spot it in the wild yourself and prevent fellow shitposters from falling into the same trap. If you're a fan of Curtis Yarvin's Clear Pill or other quote-unquote dissident figures, some of these thoughts may sound familiar to you. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel, only having another go at explaining how I sense that certain efforts are being wasted. If nothing else, I've established a personal understanding of how this phenomenon occurs and why I ought to know it when I see it. But first, I wish to set the stage using an analog that I have chosen to call the Paladin and the Wizard. This is going to get a bit strange for quite a while, so please bear with me. I've really indulged myself in the tabletop RPG or video game side of myself to pull out this one. Regardless, I hope that the analogy will help both you and me to reach a clearer understanding of the concept. I would like to start with a village or a township, a shire, if you will. The shire is sadly, unfortunately, ruled over by an evil wizard. The wizard obviously hasn't gone public with his evil nature, so it is unknown to the majority of the population. The wizard has subverted the populace of the Shire, using his foul magics such as GDP, democracy, progress, or the environment. And he does this to move the winds of change in the Shire in his direction. Those that aren't swayed by his words are happy to accept the wealth that the wizard has brought to the Shire, even though in the end it is all fake. The treasure hoard in the castle, for example, is just an illusion that the wizard conjured. There isn't actually any money there. The result is that a majority of the populace are either unaware or they tacitly accept the rule of the wizard and his will at the expense of their own freedom. They will go along with what he deems to be the correct action for the Shire as long as no one comes knocking on their door asking questions. Since the wizard is the prime mover of the Shire, he has placed his minions in pretty much all power nodes within it. His minions control and maintain the Overton Gate that defines who gets to enter into high society in his court. They man every post in Shire public school systems. He controls the Minister of Economics and thus directs the spending of the Shire. These are just a few examples of nodes that the wizard has control of. I'm sure, given some time, you could think of more. Not too long ago, a Paladin, a stalwart knight, arrived in the Shire and set up a loose organization to oppose the wizard. Due to his nature and power, the Paladin realizes that he cannot at present confront the wizard head-on in the throne room, so his operation remains mostly underground. The wizard, conscious of the instability of his rule, is always on the lookout for rivals, and especially paladins. He's keenly aware of the paladin's presence in the Shire, but he's both unwilling and at the same time unable to locate or confront the paladin in combat. I will probably return to this later. To top it all off, the Council of the Shire, obviously in the wizard's pocket, has declared paladins to be the greatest threat to Shire democracy. Now, let's dive into our two main players a bit more, starting with the wizard himself. What is the primary goal of the wizard? Well, the primary goal is to maintain dominion over the Shire and extract its wealth. And by wealth, I could mean monetary riches, but I also mean sources of power and energy for his spells and his experiments. And there will be more on this later. He hates confrontation, he dislikes coercion, and he prefers persuasion. In the words of Wilfredo Parito, the wizard is a fox, not a lion. Finally, the wizard has an incredible reserve of magical energy, or mana for the nerds in the audience. This, combined with his arcane talents, allows him to supply a near infinite army of minions. From the lowest skeleton to the most influential politician, if the wizard needs it, he can probably conjure it. So, you are a wizard. What are your measures for success? Well, you wish to maintain dominion over the Shire, and you do so by increasing the control, or maintain the control, over the politics, via persuasion. This is the ultimate success for the wizard. In theory, he could see himself doing this forever. Now, I've marked 2 other points here in red. The first one is increased control or maintain control via coercion. This is something the wizard wishes to avoid. He prefers persuasion, he dislikes coercion. This doesn't mean that the wizard is unable to use coercion when it's necessary. Oftentimes, coming down hard on a disobeying subject can send a powerful message to the others. Ultimately, though, showing his direct and raw power is risky. He risks, quote-unquote, waking up members of the populace to his true nature. He can cause collateral damage, and I'm sure you can think of more examples yourself. Ultimately, losing his position and his control over the Shire is his condition for failure. Without the structures of the Shire to hide within, he is naked and he exposed to attacks from his enemies. Let us look at what values underpin the powers of the wizard. The wizard believes that reason triumphs religion. Ultimately, given enough time, he can master the universe and challenge the gods himself. He is oligarchical, preferring that he and his fellow cronies, either wizards or minions of him, stay in power and control most levers of power in society. He's pro-democracy, which might sound at odds with him being oligarchical, but I think if you made your way to this video, by now you should realize that democracy allows for oligarchy. In fact, it means that the wizard himself gets to place all of his minions at multiple nodes of power without risking any of these nodes leading directly back to him. The wizard is a creature of quantity, or as Tolkien puts it, he has a mind of metal and wheels. He prefers mass production and ease of material comfort over quality of metaphysics and objects, of putting your soul into a product. He enjoys what I'll call directed chaos. He is more than willing to unleash devastating experiments on the population of the Shire. He's willing to detonate incredible magical bombs as long as he believes that he controls them. Or should I say, as long as he can manage them. The wizard is a globalist. The wizard cares not where the resources come from or how they arrive at the Shire, as long as they serve him and his goals. He cares not for the people of the Shire and is willing to replace them with another populace if it means they will obey him. Let's have a look at the wizard's source of mana. Now this is really getting into the nerdy stuff here, but what I mean is that it's his pool of energy. It is what metaphysical energy allows the wizard to perform the political acts, to cast his spells, to cash in his political capital, to quote-unquote get away with it, as some like to say. Something that increases the wizard's energy or mana is popular contentment. Now you might think that the people don't matter in the circulation of elites and the fight between the paladin and the wizard, but in general, as a weather vane and a source of power, the wizard draws incredible strength from the populace feeling content with his rule. He has a network of allied magicians, wizards around the world who agree with him, support each other in keeping up the appearances of the Shire and similar towns nearby. He uses the Shire infrastructure itself, the nodes of power in the government, the local newspaper. All such infrastructure tend to belong to the wizard. He thrives on lethargy in the populace. This is slightly connected to the popular contentment, but even if you were to, quote-unquote, wake up, a second layer of defense for the wizard is counting on you not really wanting to challenge him. Another source of his power is converts to his, quote-unquote, religion that he has established in the Shire. And finally, riches, monetary power to bribe and cajole himself into better positions. Now, there may be many more sources of energy, mana for the wizard, but I figured that I'd highlight some in order to get the point across that the important part is that a loss or diminishment of these sources of energy reduces the amount of, let's say, oomph that the wizard can assemble behind any of his actions. More on this later. Now, what are some of his go-to tactics and spells? Well, first of all, he uses the consent apparatus. The wizard has weaved an incredible network of institutions and minions to create the illusion of recent, well-thought-out progress of ideas within the Shire. A second spell would be social credit. Strong affirmation for believing the right thing is showered on the populace. Reterritorialization is one of his most powerful tricks. The ability to convert the energy of his enemy's attacks into something he can use himself. GDP inflation, a continuous success story as the Shire economy just keeps growing despite what any economist would tell you. Somehow it still works. University education, another finely woven filter that makes sure any person reaching the ranks of him or his minions have been taught the right things. It makes it incredibly hard to survive as a dissident member of Shire high society, or a dark elf, if you will. Woke spells, a cadre of various debilitating magics that targets younger generations of the Shire, ensuring that university education spells have an even stronger effect. I've already mentioned minion conjuring a lot, but it is important to stress and to notice minions that seem made for very explicit purposes. At times it can feel like their whole lives have led them to this 15 minutes of fame within Shire politics, where they get to perform their role. But enough about the wizard. Let's talk about his opponent, the Paladin. Now you might think that the goal of the Paladin would be to defeat the wizard. It is rather to serve his god or gods, truth and justice. His positive vision is not to defeat the wizard. Now the Paladin does extremely well in confrontation, especially a one-on-one fight. In theory, ideally, the best tactic would be to get the Paladin into the Shire Palace, all alone with the wizard. However, due to his keen sense of justice and honor, he is often distracted by the wizard's conjured minions. Opposite to the wizard as well, he has a much smaller pool of energy and power. He also has few allies. So what about his measures for success? His ultimate success factor would be to re-establish order in the Shire. Another factor is the defeat of the wizard. In theory, one thing leads to another. However, as I've outlined in red here in the bottom, any battle fought that doesn't lead to any substantial gain is to be considered a total failure. In a battle of attrition, the wizard always wins. Let's real quick look at what values form the core of the Paladin's power. You might recognize some of these. The Paladin serves a higher purpose than himself and his reason. He rejects the democratic order that the wizard has established in the Shire. He understands and supports elite theory just as well as the wizard does, but he envisions a Shire led by virtue and a hierarchy that serves the higher purposes rather than a materialist, selfish regime. He's masculine in both values and attitude, loathing the wizard for corrupting the Shire with his gay energy. He believes that the quality of objects and metaphysics trump any phenomenon of quantity. He would rather see the populace of the Shire live less consumerist lives and rather appreciate each possession, each idea, and each relationship deeper. He is localist, or you could call it a particularist. He wishes the Shire to remain something that only the Shire can be, and not change to fit the image of a network of ruthless magicians. Again, there is probably room for more values here, but these are some examples. Let's look at the Paladin's source of strength, mana, or energy. The first one is popular discontent. While the Paladin is no believer in the will of the people, an increase in popular discontent within the Shire in its current state empowers his values and his pool of energy, if only as an alternative solution to their problems. Second one is misfired wizard spells and experiments. When the wizard unleashes terrible spells and experiments upon the populace, he shows those within the capacity to oppose him who he really is. He invents problems that he has to manage, for the good of the people, of course. Over time, as these problems persist, more and more manpower and energy is intrigued by what the Paladin has to offer instead of the wizard. This is a very powerful source of energy. An interesting thought, though. I've included a snippet from a Twitter user going by OG Roland Rat, where he says, "Just think, all the Dems had to do was not be insane. All the wizard really had to do is to not terrorize the people with his crazy magics, and he could probably keep power indefinitely." Now, of course, the wizard cannot fight his nature. He must create problems he can manage. The Paladin has access to a very loose network of disillusioned nobles and organizations. This is small, and it is fractured. He has access to alternative infrastructures, although they are few and far between and take long to build. Any converts to his religion helps him with a new source of energy and willpower. And his members have incredibly strong conviction. You could call this meme magics. His gospel of truth and justice is eternal, and it goes way deeper than any tricks a wizard could produce. This creates Paladin soldiers that seldom wavers. Now, the Paladin doesn't have a spellbook in the same way that the wizard does. The Paladin has an armory, or a garrison, or a barracks, maybe. Now, his most important resource is you. Yes, you, citizen of the Shire. Now, he can supply you with many weapons and defenses and resources, but he needs you to work for him, and he needs you to use these tools. It is impossible for him to do everything himself. Here on the slide, I've just thrown up a a few tools available. We might look at more soon. Again, there's probably many you can think of yourself. Okay, so where the hell am I going with all this? Hopefully, I've been able to paint a slightly familiar picture. But the situation is as follows. We have a wizard who refuses to fight the paladin head-on. We have a paladin who physically and metaphysically cannot get to the wizard. They are forced into a proxy war of acceptable terms and arenas where they wage a sort of turf war over the Shire, metaphysically of course. It might look something like this. The paladin uses his mana, energy, and resources to recruit squires, and he establishes a front where he battles against the minions of the wizard. This, unfortunately, suits the wizard just fine. He's great at this specific type of proxy battles. He even dictates what types of tactics are allowed and disallowed in the minds of the populace, forcing the paladin into an extremely unfavorable position. Let's drop the facade and all this fantasy stuff and remove the analog. I've swapped the paladin for the dissident right, and I've swapped the wizard for the regime. I've swapped mana for energy. Now by energy, I mean political capital, momentum, monetary power, powers of law, military power, any form of actionable resource that occurs in modern politics and philosophy. But I'm also talking about the metaphysical, air quotes, energy that sort of tells us where the wind blows in a society. It could even go so far as spending time thinking or reading about something. In the modern world, especially in the digital age of the internet, the more you engage with something, the more energy you are providing it. Let's take an example. Let us recall the energy that was in the air during a lot of the early Trump era in recent politics. This accumulation of energy was quite large in 2015 and 2016, and then it sort of stagnated, fizzled a bit during his terms, and again exploded on January 6, 2021, and ultimately died out. Now with Trump's campaign in 2024, that energy is trying to revive itself through his actions, through actions of people like DeSantis in Florida. But we'll see how the distribution of that energy shows up in 2024. You would expect a battle or the fight overall to go like this. The right, the dissident right, and the establishment right uses its energy to perform explicit or implicit political action to attack key points of the regime. Then, of course, the regime uses its energy to perform actions that counter the right's actions and vice versa. I've labeled boxes for action as acceptable action. That is because there are action that is deemed unacceptable within the Overton window. We can gripe about how the regime controls the Overton window, but that doesn't change the fact that it exists and it dictates acceptable political action. Let's say that anti-illegal immigration is one of these issues. The regime wants more immigration, both legal and illegal. The dissident right wants less immigration overall. The establishment rights just want less illegal immigration, but overall, the right is united in that they want less immigration, and they put effort into countering with anti-immigration and anti-illegal immigration politicians, tweets, articles, philosophy, talks, shows, etc., etc., etc. One would expect this to either diffuse or cancel out regime pro-immigration energy, or in the best case, it would defeat the point entirely. However, the regime doesn't just block or absorb the blow of anti-immigration action. Here's what it actually does. This is a chart made by YouTube channel Academic Agent, detailing what actions receives what incentives in today's age. Let us look at anti-illegal immigration. It receives a regime approval of 75%, a chance at spots on GB News, endorsement by Nigel Farage, and a possible book deal. In general, this chart shows that the higher up you go, the more approval the regime seems to show towards the action you are performing. In addition, the total number of grifters here on the left shows, in the context of this presentation, what amount of energy is being spent on that action. Everyone engaging in a highly approved political action, either performing it or supporting it, could potentially be doing something else. So why does the regime seem to approve and reward an action like anti-illegal immigration? Because it can control it, it can redefine it, and re-territorialize it. By taking control of the energy and establishing the boundaries of the Overton window for acceptable action within the realm of anti-immigration, anything outside of that predefined set is automatically declared enemy, dangerous, and extreme. It also incentivizes those rewarded by the regime to flip on their original supporters, causing them to call their original base extremists who refuse to engage in politics, or the show, to use a term coined by Curtis Yarvin. So it is important to see that allowable action is almost always action that the regime has learned how to either deflect, absorb, or in the worst case, reverse. Because what happens when the anti-immigration energy turns on the dissident right, as I explained a minute ago? Well, something like this. All the energy that went into creating that politician or cause, or energy that wanted less immigration, is now being used to attack its source. The politician has turned on the dissident right and is calling them all extremists, doing rearguard action for the regime. I don't like sourcing tweets, but there are many examples of this happening, and I felt that this specific tweet from Astral Flight AFS Cast on Twitter collected a lot of recent regime moves, turning dissident actors into acceptable actors that are ready to punch right. The tweet reads, Pedro Gonzalez saying the dissident right is dead, Claremont publishing a Marxist feminist professor, a feminist woman pointing to Jack Murphy as a male role model, Jack Murphy getting in on the trad-cath homesteading movement. These things are all connected. You could say that these things are all connected in a more insidious way, but for this presentation my takeaway is that these moves are all part of the usual and common dissipation of right-wing energy. And as previously mentioned, in certain cases, it even reverts and attacks its origin, leading to a total loss of energy. Any energy spent in creating that person, that movement, that condition, is instead attacking the right. The right has punched, and it finds itself hurting itself. So, don't be a squire. Don't interact with, don't comment on, don't talk about, don't share, or don't even think about actors or actions within the acceptable actions parameters. And if you see a friend sharing Jack Murphy or Taylor Lawrence articles, tell him to stop being a squire. He's wasting both his and your energy. And he's giving it to Murphy, he's giving it to Lawrence, he's ultimately giving the energy for free to the regime. So what can you do? And I'll bring back my analogy for a moment here. The paladin that we serve may have noble intentions, but his way of fighting will most likely be an eternal struggle. Him and us have realized something recently, and it's that he has to turn to the Shire's Thieves Guild in order to be able to operate outside the structures that the wizard has defined. So again, don't be a squire. Be a rogue. Spend your energy, your engagement, spend your interaction on things that are more robust, more lasting, and most importantly, energy preserving. These types of actions are outside the range of the regime's spells. It cannot turn this energy against you. The only way the regime can fight it is through coercion, through violence, through action that it hates. It hates doing all of these things, because we are, as I said, ruled by a fox and not a lion. I'm sure there are more things than this box. This was just something I threw in, so feel free to comment if you have any thoughts on other ways that you can perform alternative action. So here's the final look of a model trying to explain this. The alternative action shows you a bank or a silo where you can store all of this energy. All of this direct dissonant right energy doesn't have to do anything with the acceptable actions box. It can go straight into alt action and it's ready for use when the time comes. I have mentioned Curtis Yarvin quite a bit throughout this, so it's fitting that I should reference him probably one last time. Recently he talked about what the dissonant right wants to do is akin to sending a rocket into space. It doesn't matter if the rocket gets 50% or 99% of the way there. It will fail, crash, and blow up. It needs to go all the way, 100% once it's launched. There's no going back. And to launch that rocket, you need a lot of fuel. So, stop wasting fuel. If you made it this far, let me know what you think about this way of presenting the idea. I welcome all comments, additions, and criticisms, and I don't quite feel this is a complete model yet. This is a good start. Hopefully you can help me refine it, or maybe destroy it. Thank you for watching.